I'd like to welcome everybody to April 21st, 2021 Waterloo Regional Police Services Board meeting. And I'm going to start with the Territorial Acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land on which we gather today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements, and their contributions to our community. We offer this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples of Canada. I'd ask board members, does anyone have a conflict of pecuniary interest to declare? Seeing none. Sorry, I'm getting a slight echo. Is anybody else? The first agenda item is the consent agenda items, and that is 7.1 through to 7.11. Are there any questions or any items that board members would like to have moved to the regular agenda? Ian, do you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Chair Redmond. Just a couple of questions on the 7.2 on the purchasing awards, and on 7.3, just short questions on both. I don't know when you want to deal with those.
Why don't we deal with them right now? Go ahead on 7.2, the summary of purchasing awards, Ian.
Yeah, I'm just wondering around the PPE, specifically masks, and I understand that this has been parceled out. Are there procurement rules that would prevent us from looking at domestic or local providers of, as an example, in masks?
Who would like to answer that? Chief?
Thanks very much, Chair Redmond. I'm just going to actually bring it over to Ms. Kirsten Hand, our Finance Director. Again, we've actually been working very hard to supply chain management for our members, but Ms. Hand can provide insight into our procurement bylaw.
Super. Welcome, Kirsten.
Good morning. There is no restrictions to buying local. However, we cannot, as part of our procurement bylaw and process, we cannot only take bids from local. We have to ensure that it's open to all vendors.
Ian, do you have further questions on that one, or 7.3?
7.3. So we discussed, or in the report, talks about the direct costs of COVID of 500. I think it's 535,000. The indirect cost 3.3 million. Maybe just expand on that. That's not a cash item in as much as it's from existing staff, is my understanding. But I guess the implication is that we're focusing on that part of COVID issues, and it would, I guess the question is, would it take away from other things that we might be doing that aren't COVID related? Was that why that's separated out the way it is?
Kirsten, is this something you can answer, or Chief?
Yeah, no, I think I'll speak. Obviously, Kirsten can provide more insight, but the indirect costs are related to staffing, which is already within an approved budget allotment. But as you're aware, over the last 12 months, we realigned staffing. So, for example, in our Emergency Operations Center, we moved, a dozen members, including officers and civilian professionals, to manage all things pandemic. At various points, there have been impacts on our organization, up and down. At the start of the pandemic, our call volume reduced dramatically, and so the demand wasn't as significant. We were able to shift resources. But that is ebbs and flows throughout the time. Also, we've obviously procured, our maintenance staff, and some of those pieces, are working some longer hours and doing some different pieces. But also, even more recently, the time on task for Deputy Chief Shirley Hilton, who is working and reporting directly through the IMS structure to the Regional Pandemic Control Group, along with a senior leader assisting with the task force rollout. As well as, even corporate communications, supporting some regional initiatives. So those are all indirect costs. We also have some senior leaders that, quite frankly, deserve a shout out, that are balancing multiple portfolios to continue to get the work done. And so that, it's not that they're all salaried, and it's not that they're incurring overtime, but they're keeping all the different pieces. And Kirsten may have some more insight into the financial implications, but at this point, I'm still not overly concerned that there are things that we're not getting to. Some of our strategic planning and our rollout and our innovation has slowed down a little bit. Some of that's just basically too as to how we're doing business during the world of the pandemic. But Kirsten, you may have some more specific insight into some of those indirect costs.
Ms. Hand?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to our forecast to the end of the year of the $3.3 million of indirect costs. That's a bit of a hard number to identify. As the chief mentioned, it's staff that have been operating with the Emergency Operations Center, IT support staff, vaccine task force support. The other piece that is a bit more difficult to forecast is the impact of members having to self-isolate and therefore not able to come to work in some cases and not perform work. Where we are able to, we do have them just work from home if they have to self-isolate.
Ian, do you have any further questions, or that's fine? Okay, are there any other questions on the consent agenda? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to accept. That is moved by Carl and seconded by Rosita. All those in favor, please show by raising your hands. Thank you very much. And I should have mentioned at the beginning, the chief has to appear as part of a task force on national drug strategy at 12:50. So he has a hard start at that point in time. That's not meant to truncate the business of this meeting, just to indicate he may not be available directly after this meeting to the media, which he usually is. So that will have to be arranged at another time if there are questions. Next agenda item is business arising from the minutes. Is there any business arising? Seeing none, item 9.1 through 9.4 is correspondence. Chief, do you want to highlight any of this?
No specific highlight. Much of these are national matters, and you do continue to, obviously our service working with the board is engaged in, larger provincial matters with our governance boards. I think that there's lots of excellent dialogue and discussion around policing happening, not only at the executive level, but also within our associations and our boards. So nothing specific. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn to Jill Eggleton to deal with a lot of these items. So 9.1, Jill.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, members of the board. So agenda items 9.1 and 9.2, they both include the annual calls for resolutions from the OAPSB and the CAPG. And any resolutions that we would want to submit would be presented to the members at their annual general meetings. So if the board did have any resolutions they wanted considered either at the provincial or national association AGMs, we would need to submit those resolutions to the OAPSB, which is the provincial association, by May 1st, and the National Association, the CAPG, by June 30th.
So if any board members had anything they wanted to raise, they could contact Jill and we could discuss it at a future meeting.
All right, moving on to agenda item 9.3. This is another piece of correspondence from the CAPG, and this is around a request for sponsorship for 2 governance summits that the CAPG is going to be hosting, one in April and the other in June. We do have delegates registered to attend both summits. The CAPG has hosted these summits in the past, but I believe this is actually the first time that they've issued a request for sponsors for the event. Just for some background, last year we did sponsor their annual conference in the amount of $500. Some available funds would be available in the conference budget line if we did want to sponsor one or both of the summits. The board may also want to consider whether you just want to stick to sponsoring their annual conferences or expand it to the summits. I expect that the CAPG will also be issuing a sponsorship request for their annual conference at some point in the near future.
And Jill, what is the timeline for a response for that?
I don't believe they gave us a specific timeline, but the one summit's in April. It's in, I believe, next week. And then the other one is at the end of June.
So I looked to the board to see if anyone feels that we should provide sponsorship for any of these events. Seeing none, I think we'll move on and stick to our usual sponsorship of other events throughout the year.
Okay, thank you, Chair Redmond. Just the last piece of correspondence, agenda item 9.4. This correspondence was sent to the CAPG, and that was in follow-up to discussions from the March 10th board meeting, where the board expressed their concern about the increase in the membership fees for 2021. So that's the response that we sent to the CAPG, and that's just there for your information.
Thank you, Jill. I see no questions or comments, so we'll continue to move on, but thank you for following up with all of those items. The next agenda item is Police Services Board reports.
Thanks very much, Chair Redmond and members of the board. Happy April. We have a series of presentations and reports for the board. The first one is in relation to an overview as we look back and reflect on the last 12 months. No doubt a challenging time in our community with the impact of the global pandemic, as well as other societal challenges that we're all facing. Very early on in the pandemic, our police service created and stood up an emergency operations center to deal with all related pandemic issues and work with all of our municipal, regional, provincial, and national partners. And under the leadership of Superintendent Tom Bursey, Inspector Donna Mancuso, Inspector Zima Dietrich, they've done a significant amount of work to ensure our emergency readiness, to ensure that our workforce is protected, and to ensure that we maintain services. So I'm very pleased to welcome from the Emergency Operations Center for a presentation on where we're at and the work that we're doing, and to highlight all the amazing things that they're doing. I am welcoming Constable Chris Coombs, who has been actually in the Emergency Operations Center, as well as Miss Nancy Mahar, who is our Health and Safety Coordinator and has been working in the Emergency Operations Center to provide support. Although I don't see them online here.
We're doing a bit of a search for them, Chief.
So down here. Okay.
Well, I see Inspector Mancuso there. There was some.
Turn on your video. Okay, you got to turn on the video that way. There you go. Okay.
Welcome.
Hello, sorry about that. We had a few technical difficulties. Okay, so I'm just going to introduce the Emergency Operations Center. And are you able to give us control and I can share the presentation?
You should be able to now, I think.
Okay.
Share screen. Select it. Yeah. Share.
There we go.
And then, yeah.
It's successful.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. The Emergency Operations Center was established in March 2020 in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is located at WRPS headquarters and is part of the Operational Support Division, Emergency Services Branch. The EOC is operated in line with the Incident Management System, which is a standardized approach to emergency management, providing standardized organizational structures, functions, processes, and terminology. The EOC was established using this approach. It consists of full-time and part-time members from across our service, consisting of a commander, liaison officer, safety officers, operations, logistics, as well as numerous supporting units. The EOC's primary function and responsibility is to develop and distribute internal documents such as information bulletins, directives to support WRPS membership and put it in a palatable format. This requires the EOC to remain well-versed in the frequently changing COVID-19 information, amend existing documents, and create new ones as applicable. Collaboration with regional, provincial, and federal public health, as well as external agencies such as Regional Bylaw and the Solicitor General's Office, have been paramount in the success of the EOC so far. Some of the responsibilities of the EOC safety officer is to liaise with public health by providing support and guidance to our members who have potential exposures, or have tested positive on or off duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The EOC has used numerous methods to communicate information to our members, such as the COVID-19 webpage containing directives, bulletins, flowcharts, and various COVID reference documents. The WRPS Express is sent to all members, including updates and frequently asked questions from members, as well as we've utilized e-briefings to ensure that our patrol members are aware of important information and updates. WRPS TV, posters, banners, and some videos have been used as well to visually communicate key issues, as well as messaging to our members at all WRPS buildings and divisions. Since March 2020, the EOC has been extremely busy creating and publishing over 300 documents, 240 objectives, and well over 5,000 emails have been answered. In addition, over 600 Quarantine Act checks have been conducted. I'm just going to pass you over to Nancy.
Good morning. The EOC has also implemented a number of safety strategies throughout WRPS to ensure the safety of our staff and visitors. These strategies include physically distanced workstations, reduced room capacities, and over 50 sanitization stations installed. Further strategies include the installation of plexiglass barriers at all public-facing service counters, a new automated queuing system installed at the Police Reporting Center for safe and efficient customer service to continue. As required by the province of Ontario, a screening tool was developed to screen members for COVID symptoms prior to them entering the workplace. This screening process has evolved from passive screening to a form that needed to be completed to the development of an in-house app that members can download on their smartphones. Any positive screens are automatically sent via email to the EOC for immediate follow-up to ensure the appropriate direction is provided to the member. In order to monitor compliance, all the screening data is maintained for 30 days for auditing purposes. To accommodate members who don't have smartphones, screening stations equipped with laptops were also installed in all WRPS buildings, and all paper-based screening was eliminated. Early in the pandemic, the EOC worked with Human Resources to develop and implement a work-from-home strategy, which has been adapted based on the province's COVID-19 response framework and the needs of the service. The WRPS COVID-19 exposure tracking sheet is a living document that started as a basic Excel spreadsheet and has evolved into a critical tool to track all exposures, risk level, work status, etc. This data provides a daily snapshot of the impact COVID-19 is having on WRPS. Data from the tracking sheet is also exported and shared with the membership as well as the community through such means as the WRPS intranet, the weekly issue of the WRPS Express, and various WRPS social media platforms. This helps keep our members and community aware of important WRPS COVID statistics. Thank you very much for your time today, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Chris and Nancy. Are there any questions? Karen, Ms. Schnarr, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. Really interesting. I just was curious as to, as the pandemic sort of evolves, we're now over a year into this, have you seen sort of significant changes in terms of what you've needed operationally in order to do this, or has it been pretty much just steady state?
Who would like to take that?
Over the pandemic, we have noticed that there have been some changes operationally, and we adjust to each of those changes as the framework changes. So we have everything in place now to adjust our operations to whatever the framework dictates.
Thank you very much. Any further questions, Karen? It was a lot of really, really good information. I have to say, I love the police dogs with the mask where it said wearing is Karen. That was my favorite.
We had to make it fun at some point in time.
Well, it struck a chord with me. So thank you very much for that. I see no further questions. Chief, the next update is road safety.
Thanks so much, Chair Redmond, and thanks for the opportunity to present on the Emergency Operations Center. I think when you look at the number of interactions and overall work that we do as a police service, the team has done a remarkable job of ensuring the protection of our workforce, as well as managing our impacts on staffing and alignment, and really tied to the regional scheduling team. So I want to thank Superintendent Burzy, Inspector Mancuso, Constable Coombs, and Ms. Mahar, and the entire EOC team for their amazing leadership and work. And speaking of really a bit of a nexus and a tie, very much last year during the initial stages of the pandemic, we saw the impact of road safety. Through the strategic business plan and through all of the work and consultation and town hall sessions, I know that our board and those that represent as elected officials regularly receive information around road safety and the concerns. And of course, it's ever evolving piece as we look to innovation, and I'm very pleased and proud to support the automated electronic enforcement initiatives of the Region of Waterloo. But there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes around road safety, and I'm very pleased as Superintendent Burzy, who oversees and leads our traffic services branch. I'm pleased to welcome Staff Sergeant Mark Hammer, who will be providing the board on an update as to where we're at on road safety and what the next coming months look like across our region as we look to provide support to all municipalities and townships. And so welcome, Mark, to the Police Services Board. Good to see you.
Thank you, sir. Chair Redmond, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to present our annual road safety sort of review. I'm going to share my screen here for a second and make sure, unfortunately, when I do this, I cannot see any members. So if you have any questions, please speak up and I will share it from there. Excellent. I just want to confirm that you're able to see the presentation.
It looks
my
great.
notes. Perfect. Okay, excellent. So as the chief said, my name is Mark Hammer. I'm the acting staff sergeant of traffic services. What we do in traffic services is we take a look at what happened the previous year and make our determinations over what we can do the following year. So 2020 was a hard year for this region. We've had a significant increase in our fatalities. 20 community members lost their lives on our roads. This was only the next closest time was in 2008. So we've seen significant changes in the way that we deploy since 2008, the investigative and the complex investigations that are required for that. But we do look at that and we determine what we can do better for next year. So what we do is we look at what we know from 2020. Obviously, there was a 19% increase. Out of those 20 people that lost their lives, the youngest member was 14 years old. The oldest member was 95 years old. So there's a huge age range with the average age of the people that died in the collision of 45 years old. But we did tie these in, 89% of them, to our fatal four. That's our bread and butter in the traffic services. That's our impaired driving, speeding, seatbelts, and distracted driving. So we've looked at the causation factors and all that. But when we were doing that, we also looked at the effect the pandemic did have on our roads. And we did see that total collisions were down 3,000, as well as major injury collisions were down from 88 collisions to 63. So for enforcement, our impaired driving charges did stay relatively flat. However, the alcohol impaired driving did take a significant decrease, and the drug impaired driving saw a 39% increase. These are huge numbers, with the evaluations being conducted by 11 members of our police service who have the specific training for drug recognition experts. We also saw in the beginning of the pandemic, we saw people taking advantages of our open roads. We saw an increase of stunt driving charges. In reaction to that, we partnered with the OPP locally when conducted Operation Overpass, where we saw 88 drivers from our region being charged with stunt driving. However, that doesn't make up the double increase that we saw throughout the year, and stunt driving does continue to be a major concern for us. We did see an increase in our fatal 4 charges in the last quarter, 29%, and most of that was driven after radio contingency was repealed. So what are our 2021 priorities? So we kind of break this down into 3 different groups. We are going to talk about their 30-day complaints, which I'm really excited about because it gives our community a way of getting a police response out. We have our enforcement teams, which are continuing, and we're also continuing with our monthly traffic safety plans. So this is part of larger provincial and national campaigns that we participate in. We distribute that information on e-briefing. It's always been available, but we're trying to hit more to the patrol officers just to do that. We're also relooking at our STEP program, which our STEP program is going to be, it's more kinetic this year instead of quarterly. We take a look at what we need to do and where we need to deploy our resources. So our 30-day complaints, so far, we have run 4 of these complaints. So often we hear from our community members that road safety has a huge impact on their lives. And when they make the report, they feel that they may not get anything back from it. So what we do is when we identify that a complaint has hit a specific threshold, we will assign a team of 5 traffic officers as well as a traffic supervisor to connect with the complainant, develop a plan, and implement that plan in 30 days. At the end of the 30 days, that information comes back to me and I connect with the complainant. This has been very well received so far. It is going to be kept in our database so we can understand what the trends are and identify where we need to go back, but maybe more importantly, where we don't need to go back and where we can better deploy our resources for most effective. As I stated, we did have our impaired driving charges. COVID has changed our ride deployment. We were traditionally a static ride service where it served as a great public education tool. We had shifted during our holiday ride season this year to more of a STEP ride program, which we were targeting around areas using data from where we had impaired drivers, we had impaired collisions, we were looking for previous impaired drivers. So we did stop less vehicles. However, during that ride, holiday ride, you were 4 times more likely to have to provide a mandatory alcohol screening sample, which is a great tool that we have in our pockets now. We also have our approved drug screening device. We have secured 3 additional units, making the total that we have within our service of 5. These are currently only deployed at the traffic services level, and there is a hopeful rollout to the patrol level in the future once the testing and everything has been sort of confirmed and we become pretty much the experts on that. Now, these drug screening devices are used to test for the presence of cocaine and cannabis in young drivers, novice drivers, and commercial motor vehicle drivers. And of note, I should mention with our impaired drivers, most of our drug recognition impaireds are actually from community complaints. People recognizing the symptoms of somebody passed out of the wheel at an intersection or in a parking lot, and they contact police for extra service. So our special enforcement teams were deployed last year. They went out for 7 months out of the year. We do take a break for the summer months because we supplement our roles. We have 1 traffic services officer who is assisted by 3 divisional officers. So this is an excellent leadership opportunity for the traffic services officer because they develop the plan and they oversee those 3 officers. It's an excellent opportunity for the patrol officers because the patrol officers, many of them don't have the opportunity to work throughout the region. So they're exposed to different areas throughout the community. They're exposed to different people. And it is really a dynamic team that looks to be deployed and be amendable to change. One great example of this is we had a community complaint last week for a stop sign charge in Waterloo on social media. Immediately, we were able to take the team and redirect them out to deal with that complaint. They had effective results and virtually had a very good response to that. We do have our rural focus. Our rural focus enforcement strategy is based on our collision data. We know that our rural roads have significantly higher speeds. Our regional roads have significantly higher speeds, and therefore the collisions have significantly higher consequences. We do actively go out there, and even though our total charges over top of the year had gone down by 7%, we still committed to getting out to our rural partners more often, and we saw an increase of 2%. This slide breaks it down a little bit better over what we've done in each township and overall. We are committed to making that change out there. One of the changes that we most recently implemented is liaising with the rural sergeant to ensure that all of her officers out there have the efficient or the appropriate training to run mobile radar. So the advantage is while they're patrolling their zone, they can also monitor for speeding offenders in there. So as a summary on our Fatal 4 from 2019 to 2020, as I stated, we did see the 29% increase. We did see significant speed increases though. This is offset by some of our seatbelt charges and our distracted driving charges. Our distracted driving charges have consistently gone down for the past 5 years. It's become less and less acceptable for distracted driving. There's huge insurance consequences, $615 fine, 3-day license suspensions upon conviction. So we are seeing that trend going down. However, we're also seeing the speed go up. So this is one of my favorite slides because it talks about where we are now. Q1 2020, Q1 2021. So we've obviously seen a large increase in the charges, and the most common question is why. There's a couple different reasons. One of the main ones is radio contingency. Having more officers out on the road to do enforcement is key to our success. We've also run successful distracted driving complaints or charges. And if you'd recall from the previous slide, we actually had 637 total distracted driving charges in 2021. And if you'll see on this slide, we've almost hit half that during our first quarter. We've also were able to implement in-service training on our speed devices to every patrol member within the unit, which increased their familiarity in the devices. And also at the same time, we introduced new devices. Our devices have a 10-year lifespan. The technology that was advanced in the past 10 years has been huge. The LiDAR specifically, the new tech is quicker. It allows for easier use, and the officers are generally liking it. So I am all about stats. I'm all about numbers. But that will end that part of that. And what I'll do is I will open it up to any questions that you may have.
Thank you. That's very informative and really dramatic increase. Carl, go ahead.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself there. Thank you. Mark, thanks for that presentation. And just a quick question on, I'm curious how officers handle medical marijuana patients. You know, if a driver is, you know, on cannabis for medical reasons, how do officers handle that?
Well, it is, there's obviously, they're allowed to have that, but they need to be, it's much the same as any other medicine, whether or not you're taking a prescription medicine that affects your ability to drive. Impaired driving is impaired driving. And we take a look at that seriously, and we do take appropriate enforcement action. Most of the time, we are not seeing cannabis as a huge driver. We're seeing more polydrug use, so we're seeing multiple amounts of drugs, but it is something that we would take and actively enforce.
Okay, and a follow-up question. I guess you know, I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyways. I'm positive that officers are getting ongoing training with regards to cannabis and other drugs in terms of how to deal with it.
Mark, go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of our key components is educate, educate, educate. That's why the drug screening devices are still just kept within the traffic services unit until we can develop a sort of a program of having 20 traffic officers as experts on this device and then move it out to the broader field.
Thanks very much, Mark.
Sandy, please go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to say thanks for your presence in the rural areas. I know that I've been saying this for 6 years now. The biggest complaints we get is speeding through our towns where people think they're still on the highway. And so any additional presence you can give in our smaller communities right across all the townships is very much appreciated. So thanks.
Ian, please go ahead.
Through you, Chair Redmond, very interesting report and alarming in a lot of ways. I guess the question is the speeding going up so dramatically. Is there any, I mean, is the real solution to that getting to pre-COVID traffic levels? I mean, I would assume that the speed issue is that the roads aren't as full as they are, which can produce people driving faster. I mean, is that one of the realities of having less traffic on the road? And what do we do about that in the next period of time? Because as things start to ramp up.
Mark, go ahead.
Speeding is a multidisciplinary thing over why we can do it and why we can't do it and how we're effective. We can't do it ourselves. We can't, it's not going to be charges. It's going to be that collaboration with our other community members, the Vision Zero programs that are run through the city of Kitchener, the traffic designs, the traffic calming. There's all sorts of different ways that we're going to try to combat that problem. We're just doing our small part that we can to make sure that people reduce, but it's got to be a community buy-in of people saying and understanding over their 20-kilometer commute in, what does the difference of 20 kilometers make? It makes seconds, maybe a minute. And we need to get the community to understand that and reduce their speed and kind of set that example for everybody else.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tony, please go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair. First of all, thanks for shedding some light on some of these dramatic statistics. The question I have is and please don't take what I'm saying off put here, is the severity of the speeding increased as well? And then is before COVID or before last year, if the average speed over the limit was, let's say, 15 kilometers an hour, and now it's 30 kilometers an hour. I was just wondering about the severity, if you have some sense of that severity.
Mark, go ahead.
It's really hard for us to formulate a good program from that data, because what we look at is we look at charges, and officers obviously have discretion to lay within charges, and some charges are laid at the full amount, some are laid at a reduced amount. So it's really hard to say. I know from the 24 officers that I have working in my unit, most officers are not looking for the minimal speeders, and they're definitely coming through with those numbers.
The second part to that was also, is there any monitoring of repeat offenders? Do you see that increasing, or is it just broadly right across the community, people are just a little bit more heavy on the accelerator?
Not necessarily down to the specific drivers. We do take specific driver complaints and proceed with them. But what we've done is we've identified the top 5 locations for our stunt drivers over 2020. And we've ensured that under traffic services that we have a developed plan to address those areas and hit those areas on a frequent basis to make sure that we're a deterrent in that specific location. And if the areas change, then we can change that for the following year.
Okay, thank you.
Karen, please go ahead.
Thank you. Just a clarification question. So the 2 questions, actually. The first clarification on, I think maybe the first or second slide, it talked about a 19% increase in fatal collisions happening. If I did my math right, it's 3 additional ones over last year. So we were at 19 and we were at 16 last year and 19 this year. Okay.
We were at 16 collisions with 17 people that lost their lives.
Okay, thank you. My second question is, I'm an academic, so I wonder, just because we're in such a weird scenario right now, like just in terms of what traffic patterns look like, to the points that Ian and Tony have raised, that number, the speeding number is really high, particularly if you think of like the first 3 months of 2021. Theoretically, we were all in lockdown and none of us were supposed to be leaving our houses to go, do anything. So to me, that makes it even more dramatic because a big chunk of that should have had less traffic on the road related to it. How, and this is a super unfair question, so I apologize ahead of time, Mark, how generalizable is this data? Like, so is it like, if we're thinking about making policy changes, is this just anomalistic because of we're just not in normal conditions, or I wanted just to get a little bit of a sense of your approach to the stuff that we're seeing.
Mark, feel free to say it's not a fair question. You can acknowledge that if you want.
Well, I will answer it a little bit, and it looks like the chief is just chomping at the bit, so I probably let him speak a bit more organizationally. When we have implemented our traffic enforcement teams, that was something that we didn't do until February of last year, as well as for 1 month, I believe it was April, we had taken a break from doing that as well. So that affects that, where this year we're seeing our traffic enforcement team out there and having, unfortunately, they're having huge success. The numbers from the individuals that are out there in April is 647 charges so far this month. That's from 4 officers. The speeding remains to be an issue. So we are seeing the speed, but we're also seeing the fact that we were able to conduct appropriate enforcement as well.
Karen, do you have any further questions or comments? Thank you, Chief. Did you want to jump in on this question?
Maybe just some closing comments if there's no other questions, Chair Redmond, and I will speak to Ms. Schnarr's comments because they're very fair and valid, but I'll wait to see if there's any other questions or comments.
Okay, Carl, go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly, Mark, I just wanted to know how you feel, or have you had a chance to, some of the municipalities have gone to reducing speed limits in school areas from 50 to 40 kilometers. Just wondering, hopefully, I'm hopeful that that's going to be of assistance, but I'd like to hear your comments on it.
Mark?
I would say that's almost a better question than Mr. Schnarr's. The reduction in school zones is based on a number of reasons. We are seeing that. We are looking, we have just conducted a huge enforcement program in the Dune South area, which does have the reduced speed zones. We actually didn't see that. We saw that the drivers were more complying to the actual design of the road, which in that specific area is designed very narrow to try to reduce those speeds. So we're not seeing the huge increase that we would normally see.
Carl, any further questions?
No, thanks for that.
So Chief, before I let you jump in, I thought this is where Tony was going with his questioning. Is street racing a discrete distinction in category from just speeding?
Yeah, so stunt driving includes speeding at a rate of 50 kilometers an hour or more over the limit. It also has a number of different things. There's people in a trunk doing a wheelie, sliding across an intersection. So all those stunts are incorporated, but the vast majority of those 285 charges are speed related.
Thank you very much, Chief. Go ahead if you want to make some concluding comments.
Well, thanks so much, Chair Redmond. I want to thank Staff Sergeant Mark Hammer and our traffic services team for their excellent work, as well as all of our patrol divisions. Road safety remains a significant priority. And speaking to Dr. Schnarr's comments in relation to 2020, I think from a data perspective will impact many different of our annual averages. So when we look at crime severity, when we look at calls for service, when we look at even our financial budgeting piece, road safety, it really is an interesting year where data, I think, there'll always, I think, be an asterisk somewhere when we report on that. But to your point, what I find really surprising, much like all of you, that, we are in provincial stay-at-home orders, shutdowns, et cetera. And I have definitely, even in my own commutes as an essential worker coming to lead the police service, I do notice the traffic patterns and volumes have much changed. And whether that's people going for drives and trying to get fresh air, et cetera. But obviously our commercial traffic remains very heavily. But today's presentation was to give you some insight on how we're adapting and shifting and listening to community concerns. You can see by the results that I think that, we are shifting and doing work in a much better perspective. It's very troubling. And of course, I know that many of our community members, and in particular the elected officials, get emails saying, there's never really a cruiser around when you need them, or there's not enough visibility. And so I think that we need to continue as a police service, but also as a police services board, work with all levels of government. I think that our provincial government has very progressive, advanced regulations around driving, as well as federal legislation around impaired driving is very modernized and progressive. And I think provincially and federally, we are leading, across many nations. But equally, we have to look at working with our regional and municipal partners around road design, around policy decisions, the automated speed enforcement program. It's such a multifaceted approach to how we address road safety. It can't simply be about enforcement. It has to be a real collective. And so thanks to Staff Sergeant Hammer and team for your excellent presentation. And thanks for the board's indulgence in the presentation. So we'll keep you posted on how we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. That was a great presentation. The next one is an important presentation, Police Reported Hate Crimes in Canada 2019. I believe Ms. Glode and Ms. Lowe are going to speak to this. Chief, do you want to kick it off?
Thanks, Chair Edmund, and pleased to welcome Ms. Margaret Glode, our Manager of Strategic Services, and Ms. Denise Lowe, who manages all of our Stats Canada and compliance reporting to the board. I do want to note that this is 2019 data, and it really highlights Dr. Schnarr's comments that Stats Canada, due to the pandemic, couldn't get to all of their reporting in 2020. There was some release of raw data, etc. But Ms. Glode and Ms. Lowe will take the board through the piece. I also want to make a community acknowledgement of the Coalition of Muslim Women that are working in partnership with our police service and our equity, inclusion, diversity team, as well as our hate crime team. They've recently launched a hate incident reporting portal, which everybody across our community is encouraged to check out. And it talks about the different thresholds. Hate crime is a very difficult threshold to meet, but this also provides us the ability to understand what's really transpiring in our community. So thanks to the team at the Coalition of Muslim Women for their amazing leadership and work, and appreciate the support of many different government agencies, including the region and our provincial government, in funding that. Over to Ms. Glode and Ms. Lowe. Welcome.
Thank you, Chief, Chair Redmond, and members of the board. I just want to provide a quick background, and then I'll hand it over to Denise to take you through the report. But as the Chief mentioned, it does seem like the data in this report is a bit dated. It's from 2019. Part of this is as a result of Stats Canada's commitment to get this data out in a more timely fashion. So as the Chief mentioned, this 2019 data was available publicly last year. What they've done is delayed some of the preparation of their analytical reports that go along with the data. So that's why this report is following at a much later date. This one was just released in March. And the analysis from Stats Canada always really provides a great overview of the trends across Canada and in the census metropolitan areas. So that's just some of the highlights that Denise is going to take you through in this report. So thank you.
Welcome, Denise.
Hi, good morning. Hope you can hear me. So I will go right into it. As kind of the Chief has alluded to, the threshold of hate crime is quite difficult to meet. So I'll start off with the definition of what a hate crime is. So as per Statistics Canada, hate crime is defined as a criminal violation motivated by hate based on race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation or gender identity or expression, or any other similar factor. Suspected hate crimes are also kind of rolled into this report as well. So we're looking at both hate crimes and suspected hate crimes for this report. So according to Statistics Canada, in 2019, hate crime accounted for less than 0.1 of over 2.2 million police reported crimes in 2019. So that's about 1,946 police reported hate crime incidents in Canada. This is up by 7% or 129 incidents from the 2018 levels. And to date, or in 2019, it's the second highest reported police reported hate crime numbers in the last 5 years. In 2019, 46% of all hate crime in Canada were motivated by hatred of race or ethnicity. And individuals who identify as black were most often the target. And in the report, you'll see that I have a table that lists the percentage of all the hate crime motivations by year. So I have data presented for 2017, 2018, and 2019. By violation, nonviolent violations, most commonly mischief, are the dominant type of hate crime offenses across Canada. And the most common violent violation is common assault. And again, there is a chart in the attached report that lists the percentages and counts of all the nonviolent and violent hate crime violation by year. Hate crime in the Kitchener, Cambridge, and Waterloo CMA. In 2019, the rate of police reported hate crime in our CMA was 2.5 incidents per 100,000 population. This is well below the national average of 5.2. And nationally, the Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo CMA ranked 25th of all 35 other CMAs across Canada. Provincially, our CMA ranked 12th and is also below the provincial average of 5.8 incidents per 100,000 population. Within our CMA, the police reported hate crimes reached its lowest level in 2019 with 15 reported hate crime incidents. And you can see that our numbers from 2014 to 2019 has really fluctuated. It has gone up and down throughout the years. Locally, the majority of the police reported hate crime was nonviolent in nature. Just over half of the police reported hate crimes in our area were mischief offenses, similar to the national trend. And also similar to the national trends, the hate crime motivated by race and ethnicity accounted for 60% of all the hate crimes in our region. So again, I've noted that the fluctuations in our data occurs yearly. We're currently going through our 2020 verification right now, but unofficially I can say that we are looking at a slight increase for our 2020 numbers. And that concludes my summary of the police reported hate crimes in 2019.
Thank you, Marg and Denise. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, I guess, and I don't know if this is a question for the chief or one of the deputies. One of the threshold is quite high, and that's already been indicated, but the reporting is the other issue. And I guess, Chief, that's why the Coalition of Muslim Women and their initiative is so important, so that people are actually reporting this and feeling safe about reporting it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Redmond. Yes, we have a partnership with the Coalition of Muslim Women, where even if somebody reports to their portal and it's reviewed by their team and it believed and or a belief that it meets the threshold, it will then actually roll over into our police service for follow-up and investigation. And I think that's one of the frustrations of our community, and I think it's one of the things that we hear regularly when we hold town hall sessions, and even in the strategic business piece of understanding people's concerns, is that, there at times a frustration when they contact the police service that, no action was taken in the sense of no criminal charge or no process for the judicial system, that, there may be a perception and or a belief that the police response was not appropriate or fulsome, but it's a really hard threshold to meet. And that's why we believe the online hate portal through the Coalition of Muslim Women will allow us as a community to understand much greater what are some of the challenges we're facing and what are some of the systemic and structural pieces where we need to work on. So, it's a work in progress as we roll through here, but again, a significant amount of work that we hope to advance is around actually encouraging people to report. Not about whether or not we look at whether it meets the threshold or not. Let us actually determine that. Let us investigate so we can understand true, meaningful what's happening and the challenges in our region, and then work with other community partners around community-led initiatives that actually address hate within our community. When you look at some of the trends across Canada, and particularly right now, the consistent attacks on our Asian community, simply unacceptable right across the nation. Waterloo Region is not immune to that. We've been working with the Chinese Canadian Waterloo Region Association around education and doing business differently. So again, the message to anyone and all is that if you believe that you're the victim and or you witnessed and or even from a mischief perspective, graffiti of some form of hate, please contact us so we can actually do a proper investigation. Our hate crime team is notified of all of those. But I also do want to promote the work that the Coalition of Muslim Women is doing.
Thank you very much, Chief. Ian, go ahead.
Through you, Chair Redmond, just to follow up on that, I think the reporting, this is a national report, so these stats are only if people are actually reporting them into police services. And I guess the one question I did have is what's the criteria that would that delineates non-violent versus violent? I'm just interested in what that looks like, because that can be a subjective thing for a lot of folks. And I guess the last question, we'll do them both at once, is are the thresholds or the criteria something that need to be reviewed? Because I mean, you want to make sure that they're all reported, number one, to understand the magnitude of the issue. And I guess I wonder whether that needs to be reviewed, and who would do that? Is that Chiefs of Police? Is that Stats Canada? Who's pulling that together?
So thanks so much. Maybe I'll answer the second, and then I'll throw it to Denise for the first. But the first piece, it's federal legislation, and so it's an act of parliament. And so I can tell you that many different community organizations, as well as the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, have been engaged in discussion with the Attorney General and Public Safety Canada around thresholds and those processes, because we would need an act of parliament to amend the legislation. So I know that there's ongoing dialogue with all of our various community agencies, community groups, as well as those engaged in the judicial system. But the actual the actual threshold piece of violent and non-violent, I'll throw that over to Denise, and she'll take you through how we code and how we manage that.
Sorry, I'm just going to take a little bit of time to kind of pull up the definition. So if you go into the report, the Statistics Canada Juristat report, it actually has the categories listed as to what counts as a non-violent and what counts as a violent crime. So I'm just going to pull that up so I can read that definition as well, and give you the official definition of it. So just please bear with me while I pull up this report.
Take your time, Denise. I think Marg's ready to jump in if you haven't.
Yeah,
tried.
I just, while Denise is looking,
If you can get it to you quicker than I can, please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add, so every criminal code violation has a 4-digit UCR code, and it's all really based on the Criminal Code of Canada for the most part. Violent offenses are identified as violations against a person. So there's usually a victim involved one way or another. So homicide, robbery, things like that. So the non-violent is property code offenses and any other criminal code offense. So those are the three general categories, and they generally add property crime and other criminal code offenses together into and lump them in as the non-violent type.
Well, that's helpful. And the report, my eyes are so bad, I must have missed some of the fine print, but that's helpful to have. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in there, assault and anything with a weapon would obviously be considered as violent. Uttering threats or graffiti, that sort of things will be the non-violent categories. So they criminal harassment and other violent violations, like Mark had previously mentioned, relating to the persons, would be captured in, as violent violations.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, ladies. Karen, please go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, I mean, I find all of this data interesting. I think the challenge, though, is, and it's beyond our control, is just, how long it takes organizations to produce it. So I would suggest that society in 2021 right now is very, very different again than where we were in 2019. Unfortunately, I don't think we've seen an improvement related to hate crimes. I think we're going to see when we see stats, from 2020, 2021, I think we've become more polarized society. So I just want to say I find it really helpful when the chief talks about, what is our current reality and, what's going on now. So I found that information very helpful. And if I can just add, and I feel bad saying this because I know, I've been part of the budget discussions. I know how unbelievably overstretched we are from a resource perspective. But I personally think things like what Deputy Hilton is involved with some of the really exciting new pilot projects around the sexual exploitation of women. And certainly I had the absolute pleasure of being part of one of the outreach discussions with our Jewish community related to them talking about ongoing experiences they have with hate crimes. And I know that's experienced by other communities. So from a resourcing perspective, whatever funds we are putting towards this, that the chief already, spoke to, and if some of those, ideas can be expanded through communication and outreach to other communities so people feel safe and secure in letting us know that these things are happening. I just want to say I think I'm very, very supportive of that.
Thank you, Karen. And I guess just to also underscore the Coalition of Muslim Women and the sexual assault partnerships we had, and the more I think that this service continues to reach to our community partners, the greater depth we will have when we look at these issues. So I think those kinds of initiatives also bode really well to getting accurate read on these issues and having people feel safe in reporting. Thank you very much. Chief, I don't know if you have any parting comments before we go on to the strategic business plan.
I just want to thank Margaret and Denise for their continued diligent work around data and uniform crime reporting and tracking all the numbers that happen. They do an outstanding amount of work to keep us updated. So thank you very much. We'll keep moving through, and next up is a return of our strategic business plan in partnership with the Police Services Board. And since we last were together, we've been busy doing a lot of work. I call it exciting. I'm not sure my colleagues on the line would concur with me around the excitement of all the work we're doing. As you know, it's tedious and very much being driven. That being said, we have developed 83 action plans to support the 20 goals of the Police Services Board strategic plan. And we've operationalized all of those. And I'll welcome Miss Amanda Francini and Miss Margaret Claude once again, who are the leads on this, working very closely with the Police Services Board and Miss Jill Eglinton. So welcome, Marg and Amanda, over to you.
Thank you again. I'm going to pass this one right over to Amanda. You know that she's the expert in this area, so over to you.
Welcome, Amanda.
Good afternoon. I would like to highlight some of the progress we've made since the board approved the 20 goals and their accompanying objectives in the February open session. WRPS was tasked with a couple of follow-up actions, one being to apply the same level of specificity to the layer under the objectives, because the objectives themselves kind of ranged from very broad strategies to very specific actions. So we were trying to get that consistency to that layer underneath. As well, we were challenged to apply SMART principles to our initiatives going forward. So to that end, we identified some goal champions. There are actually 15 unique goal champions assigned to each of the goals, and they'll provide some of this oversight. We related this next work to the GOST acronym, G-O-S-T. So with the goals and objectives finalized, our next task was to tackle the S, being the strategies. And that again is how we're going to achieve these goals and objectives. So we're getting really operational at this point. So to that end, we developed a template and we provided that template to the goal champions. It had sections to fill out which matched their goal assignments. They had to identify positions accountable. So creating that link between who is going to do some of this monthly reporting and potentially doing the work behind this objective. So working together, the goal champions and positions accountable completed a template for us. They collaborated on about 4 to 6 high-level actions as to what it would take to achieve that objective. And that kind of number is not uncommon. I mean, it's used in project management as well. If you're working on a SIPOC diagram, thinking of the process where you're delivering to customers. So keeping it high level, keeping it to a few but quality numbered actions. They were challenged to further draft some timelines. So their actions, their strategies had some timelines which could range, but ultimately we wanted to know the year that this objective was anticipated to be accomplished, as well as what metrics would help us understand whether this objective was complete. Now, there are some objectives that are ongoing. We won't stop doing them, but once we have the processes in place and we're confident that it won't take any further intervention, if it can just be measured and monitored, we would consider that objective complete as well. The goal champions and positions accountable were also meant to consider how the actions, that 4 to 6 bundle of actions, remained relevant to the spirit of the goal and the objective. I mean, we're working within the board's framework, and as well, whether this objective needed to be further resourced. So we're working with our HR, IT, and finance branches to ensure that everything is planned foundationally so that there are no unexpected resource needs. This is going to assist with workload, whether it's time, people, or technologies. And so this also satisfied the SMART elements of SMART. There are various versions of SMART, but basically we were working with whether things were specific, so that became our 4 to 6 bundle of actions, whether things were measurable, so that was indicated in the metrics section of the template, whether things were achievable and assignable, so just by having the goal champions, positions accountable, and any supporting persons in the service identified, that was more tangible. The realistic and resourced, as well as the timelines, that's our SMART. And after these action plans were drafted between the goal champions and positions accountable, the Chief Strategic Advisory Council spent some time also reviewing them. They made some suggestions. They were able to help us timeline and highlight and flag the resources required. So now our office is liaising with the positions accountable and goal champions to refine as needed, to follow up with any questions that were raised. And over the course of April, our office will further program an online reporting tool. So with the 4 to 6 actions set and timelines set, we're now going to take the positions accountable and have them report on a monthly basis. These positions accountable will receive some orientation and provide their first updates in May so that we can provide the first strategic business plan progress report in June.
Was that your big finish? Because that was actually really fascinating, Amanda. I love hearing all this hard work.
Well, it's really important to, at the beginning, to set all of this foundation. These action plans are meant to be revisited over the course of 3 years, but they're also meant to be transferable. So if positions change, if people change, there is still this foundation for them to consult over the course of the plan. So putting some thought and effort into it now is going to pay off over the course of 3 years to ultimately achieve our outcomes. So not just the outputs indicated by the metrics, but what are the good news stories by the end of these achievements, and how does it relate back to all our scanning that we did with our members and community?
So I would have to concur with the chief. I think this is very exciting to see this animated after the board and senior leadership and you and Jill and so many staff met with community groups to identify gaps. I think this whole rollout and operationalization of it's very exciting. Any comments or questions?
If I could just jump in here real quick, I would also like to acknowledge all the amazing work that Amanda has been doing over this process. She's really been quite the leader in all of this, and has been very thoughtful and patient, bringing all our members along. I know even just the editing process and the review with these 82 action items, she's been reaching out to all the different goal champions and persons accountable, and just a tremendous wealth of expertise, Amanda, and a big thank you.
I would echo that on behalf of the board.
It's exciting to have quite the variety of persons involved in this planning process as well. So we have 69 different positions accountable across the service involved with these action plans, and they're not working in isolation either. So those 69 are still reaching out to one or two others, and that's going to spread the influence of the plan. So that's exciting as well.
So thank you very much. We look forward to those reports, and the precise focus is very exciting. Over to you, Chief.
Well, thanks so much. And we did want to come back to the board to let you know that we've actioned and operationalized the board's strategic vision for the 20 goals. And of course, we continue to work with Ms. Eggleton to set up a reporting mechanism so that the board can understand and see where we're heading, the accomplishments, the gaps, and potential risks to completing the plan. But we're in good shape, and once again, want to recognize the work of the entire team, with special thanks to Jill, Amanda, and Margaret. So we'll keep motoring through the agenda if we can, and pleased to welcome Ms. Kirsten Hand, our Director of Finance and Assets, to discuss the December 2020 financial variance report. You do have the board report in front of you, but Ms. Hand will take you through the highlights and year end, as well as looking to the managing the variance.
Great,
Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you. So the report before you provides information on 2020 operating and capital results. From an operating variance perspective, we did close the year with a positive surplus of $3.2 million, or 1.8%. Given the timing of the need for the region of Waterloo to complete their financial statements, we did apply the most recently approved reserve and reserve fund management policy to that positive variance, and it was transferred to the capital reserve, given that our general reserve is already at its targeted balance of $2 million. We will bring forward a report in May in regards to all of the reserve and reserve fund balances to facilitate further discussion and information around the balances. The majority of the positive variance related to staffing vacancies. So in the report, it shows that there was 39 vacancies compared to the authorized count, and that was made up of 18 sworn positions and 21 civilian positions. We were also under our permanent part-time civilian authorized count, which equated to almost $1 million of savings. We did have a salary gapping target in 2020 of about $2.5 million. However, the amount of vacancies did exceed that, resulting in the positive variance. More detailed analysis is provided within the report, but I'll just touch on some of the larger variances. So we were over the overtime budget by just over $1 million. However, it was significantly reduced from 2019 levels by 48%, or approximately 74,000 hours. Overtime continued to be impacted by those staffing vacancies, as well as the voice radio contingency plan that required officers to double up in vehicles until October. We continued to see lower compensation related to paid duty services, but that also resulted in lower revenues. So no impact to essentially the bottom line. From a benefits perspective, we were slightly over budget by about $364,000, and that related to higher medical and dental expenses, WSIB expenses as well. Under our materials and supplies area, we were lower than budget by about $615,000, and that related to fuel savings, both because of the voice radio contingency plan, as well as reduced vehicle use due to the pandemic and lower budgeted gasoline rates and lower uniform purchases to date. Another area where we saw more significant positive savings was on the meetings and travel line. We did see we were underspent by $477,000, and that was primarily related to the pandemic. From an interfund transfer line, we did show a negative variance budget, and that resulted in a positive variance that we saw from our voice radio chargeback model for the new regional-wide P25 voice radio system. So there was a surplus resulting from the chargeback model, so that those dollars have been moved into the voice radio reserve to be either factored into future voice radio chargeback rates and or put towards future system replacement. And overall revenue was under budget by $2.7 million. Some of that related to record checks being lower than anticipated due to the pandemic. We saw lower revenues relating to alarm response, which is actually a good news story because that means that our officers didn't have to attend as many false alarms due to the verified alarm procedure that was put in place. And we saw some lower than budgeted revenues relating to our fire services project. And lastly, there was anticipated in the 2020 budget that we would pull from the benefit stabilization reserve $715,000, and we did not complete that entry due to the positive surplus. From a capital perspective, almost $10 million was spent in 2020. That represented 34% of the budget, and an additional $16.9 million was carried forward to 2020 for projects to be completed this year. That resulted in about $2.3 million overall of budget that was originally anticipated in 2020, but not required, nor carried forward. From a fleet perspective, we did replace 53 vehicles. Another 2 were ordered and will arrive in 2021. And through utilization reviews, we were able to reduce 2 vehicles from the fleet. From an IT perspective, we did see expenses relating to the administrative phone system replacement, the implementation of an internal communication platform or WRPS TV, remote access security and business intelligence tools projects. We spent about $87,000 relating to furniture expenses and about $1.8 million relating to equipment, which is utilized to replace items that are at end of life, such as IT hardware, soft body armor, use of force, and specialized equipment for our area. $3.2 million were spent on facilities program area expenses, the redesign of the front lobby of our headquarters building. There was a lot of work done in 2020 and it completed in the spring of 2021. New Central completed its design phase, and the construction also started up more recently the spring of 2021 as well. The expansion of our parking and implementation of sidewalk and crossing areas at headquarters campus also, the construction has started up in 2021 already as well. We implemented 1 electronic vehicle charging station at headquarters, and we also implemented some security upgrades at our HQ campus to address an aging card access system replacement that was required, as well as other security enhancements. And lastly, a number of projects were completed in relation to facilities managed CAP for renewal, which the region maintains on our behalf. So that's just a summary of the results relating to 2020. As I mentioned, we will come back in May with a more detailed information around our reserve balances compared to the target balances. Thank you. I'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hand. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Karen, please go ahead.
Again, with the unfair questions today, but it's just sort of like an overall question I like asking. So, Kirsten, were there any surprises or red flags when you went through this that you weren't expecting when you took a look at this data? I'm essentially making you do my work for me, right? I should be able to pick it out, but you'll be able to do it faster. So I'm asking it this way.
No, I mean, most of the savings we were anticipating in terms of staffing vacancies, as well as lower spends relating to, you know, items such as travel, training, as well as, you know, other projects that, you know, were paused due to the pandemic. So I would say no.
Do you have any other hard questions, Karen?
No, not at this. I was thinking about one, but I will wait until the more detailed financial things comes back next round.
Thank you very much. I see no other questions or comments. So Kirsten, thank you very much. And we look forward to the report next month. Chief, over to you.
Thanks so much. Just in closing, I do think it goes to the caveat on a lot of these issues is that obviously 2020 was a unique year, but I do want to recognize the work of our finance and assets team. Very early on in the pandemic, we tasked them with starting to look at the impact that this would have on the organization. You know, training was paused, construction was paused, some major innovation projects were paused. And how do we manage this? And also the increased demand for PPE, personal protection equipment, enhanced cleaning. Those are things that we did not necessarily project in our regular budgeting piece, but kudos to the team for seeing that through. And now part of our plan is looking at, you know, this year and next year as though some of those projects were pushed. What does this mean overall from a budgeting perspective? So we do look forward to returning in May with a much more detailed report as well as a reserve update for all of you. But those are all fair and comments around surprises moving forward. The next one I'm actually going to pitch over to Ms. Kirsten Hand and Mr. Scott Agnolo, our procurement managers tied up in another matter, but Ms. Kirsten Hand will take you through a procurement supply requisition in relation to the delivery of our sidearms as part of our recovery and replacement program. And I do believe we also have Inspector Boucher with us as well, who can answer any questions and commentary in relation to our use of force and provincial mandates and guidelines. So over to you, Kirsten.
Thank you. There's a recommendation before the board that they accept the tender of Rampart Corporation for the supply and delivery of 9mm Glock handguns. The contract period is 5 years, commencing May 1st, with the option to renew for one additional 5-year period for $353,000 plus taxes. The Glock handguns were end of life and were planned for replacement. Therefore, we did do a request for tender and only received one tender back. And as per the bylaw, if we receive anything less than 3 tenders, we're to come back to the board for approval. This was to be expected. They were one of the only distributors that we were aware of in Canada. And also it represents replacing 502 handguns in 2021. We do expect to see some savings on the ammunition side in the 2022 budget, provided that there is no change to current pricing. As well as in the report, it does note that the tender did come in under budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hand. Jason, do you want to add anything, or are you just here to answer the tough question?
I'm here to answer Dr. Schnarr's. I think she's tabled them with unfair questions, but just to add to what Kirsten has indicated, our current Glocks have come to end of useful life. Rampart, who was the successful bidder on this contract, is in fact the sole supplier, commercial supplier for Glocks in Canada, and hence that was the expectation of the one bid.
Thank you very much for that. I see no, Ms. Schnarr, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Thank you for this report. I just wanted to say, because I know at times in the past, and I think unfortunately Deputy Crowell has been at the receiving end sometimes about procurement issues, because I take an interest in those. I just wanted to say that, to me, this is a good example of just process being followed exactly how process should have been followed for this. There's one, responded, but it followed due process. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Would you also like to be the mover of this motion? Okay, moved by Karen, seconded by Rosita. I see no questions, so all those in favor? That is carried, colleagues. Thank you. 11.7 is the 2021 Q1 use of force statistics report, and I believe Inspector Boucher, you're up for this one. Chief, do you want to say something first?
Well, thanks so much, Chair Redmond. Very pleased to welcome Inspector Boucher to for the presentation, as well as our team that continues to do significant work. This is, as you're aware, we've actually have advanced gone to a quarterly report versus a biannual report as a part of our commitment to accountability and transparency. So happy to welcome Inspector Boucher to take you through the report. Over to you, Jason.
Thanks very much, Chief. Chair Redmond, members of the board, good afternoon. I want to thank Jill as well, too, for assisting me in the background there with the technical aspects of delivering this report. So as the Chief has indicated, and Jill, you could maybe go to the next slide, please. As the Chief has indicated, this is the first report of what we'll be doing going forward on a quarterly basis. This meets our commitment that we made back in 2020 to move from semi-annual to quarterly. What we'll also see over a period of time is this report will then be married up to a more comprehensive race-based data reporting strategy. The one thing I want to caution, and I've cautioned the board on every presentation I've done on this topic, is the volatility of data. Now, while quarterly reporting provides better transparency and more quasi-real-time reporting, it does cut our data set in half as well, too. So we should expect that the volatility will subsequently increase as well. So just to go back to the foundational background pieces, reportable incidents, if you recall, are those instances that require police service or a use of force report by legislation, so the Police Services Act. And to remind you, we also expand our reporting categories through our procedures as well, to our use of force procedures. A reportable incident may generate several use of force reports. So if a number of officers attend an incident that requires each of them to deploy a use of force technique, each of them would be required to produce a report, except for those that are done by teams. So in this case, it would be the exclusive right of our emergency response unit to do team reports. And again, as a reminder, each of those reports goes through 3 layers of scrutiny: the staff sergeant at the platoon or the unit, the senior leader of the unit, branch, or division, then finally a use of force trainer in training and education. Jill, on to the next slide, please. Thank you. What we did in order to provide some comparative statistics is we extracted fourth quarter data from the semi-annual report that we produced for you last time. What you're going to find with some variability is that the numbers have remained relatively static quarter over quarter. One thing, however, I do want to point out, which I do believe is statistically significant, is we believe that the public health measures over a period of time have reversed the trends for things that we've seen historically go up year over year, which is occurrences, arrests, charges, those sorts of things. If I could draw your attention for a moment to the pie chart down at the lower right-hand side, again, officer-initiated incidents that involve use of force reporting, in fact, are very small, accounting for only 5% of incidents within this reporting period. One thing, though, that was, I believe, statistically somewhat significant is warrant executions, and our assistance, particularly in warrant executions of other police services, have gone up dramatically over last quarter, accounting for 30% of our use of force reports during this time period versus 16% last time. Again, the numbers of incidents involving use of force continue to be very, very small and less than 0.1% of our overall occurrences. Jill, to the next slide, please. You'll see on this slide over on the far right-hand side, warrants have gone up considerably and are number 2 of the main drivers for incidents that necessitated a use of force report. As we have seen in the past, dangerous weapons continue to be the primary or number 1 driver of use of force incident reports. Jill, on to the next slide, please. Again, looking at this report relative to the fourth quarter, numbers remain relatively and statistically very static. I will, however, again, provide the caution that with a much smaller data set, we could see significant volatility in these numbers on a year-over-year basis or a quarter-on-quarter basis. We do see that secondary use of force options like OC or pepper spray, batons are now 0. And again, we believe with full confidence that that is due to the introduction of the conductive energy weapon, which we're going to talk about on this next slide. Conductive energy weapons, again, remain relatively static. You know, we see that fourth quarter, for instance, drawn weapons are 16 versus 29. Again, that number is very small. I do want to remind the group, however, that if you look at 2019 annual statistics versus 2020 annual statistics, that number went up considerably. And that was due to a procedural change that we made between those 2 years, where officers, every time they withdrew the conductive energy weapon from the holster, were required to produce a use of force report. Even if it's only drawn and then reinserted back into the holster, we believe this enhances our transparency. It also allows us to look at the usefulness of that tool from the perspective of it being a de-escalation technique. Jill, on to the next slide, please. For fear of it sounding like a broken record, again, injuries remain relatively static quarter over quarter, with officer injuries going from 3 to 6 and subject minor injuries going down from 10 to 8. Importantly, no serious injuries during either of those 2 periods. But again, I want to remind you from the 2019 to the 2020 statistic where minor injuries went from 5 to 38. This is attributable to, again, a procedural change whereby when emergency medical services are required to attend at a call for probe, CEW probe deployment, we would contact paramedics. They would actually do that withdrawal, and that increased our statistics considerably from 2019 to 2020 from a minor injury perspective. Jill, next slide, please. On this slide, we speak of officer perception of subject race. And again, I'll remind you that race categories are provided to us by the ministry. And where an officer places a subject within that category is based on the perception of that officer. So there will be some statistical anomalies that come out of this. We may have 3 or 4 officers at a particular incident that may perceive a race to be different. So we may have, as you go through the appendix, instances where you'll see an officer or subject perceived race to be 2 different categories. You'll actually see on paper some fairly significant changes statistically in each of the race categories. But again, I wish to caution that these, we believe, at least at this period of time, to be volatility based into the system based on a very small data set. I would ask that each of you go to Appendix C and take a look at that appendix where we've broken down each of these incidents, and we have provided to the greatest degree possible some narrative around the occurrence, not so much that we identify the subject, but enough for you to hopefully understand the circumstances at that particular time. So Jill, on to the next slide. Despite, again, the frequency of interactions with members of our community, that being 72,000 and 3,234 arrests in this reporting period, very few, or less than 1%, resulted in a reportable incident. And again, we attribute that to great de-escalation techniques by our officers. Injuries to both subjects and officers occurred during these times remain very low. And while provincially mandated use of force reports remain a valuable tool for analyzing officer actions, several deficiencies have been identified which limit comprehensive data analysis. This is a matter that we will be working on going forward to see if there are actual meaningful conclusions that we can draw from the data set that were provided. And finally, commitment to future action. On our next slide, please, Joe. That use of force reporting to the board will continue on a quarterly basis and will be incorporated into a much broader WRPS race-based data collection strategy. We, as a training education branch, continue to work very closely with our equity, inclusion, diversity team. At the end of 2020, we completed implicit bias awareness training, Indigenous awareness training. We've rolled out some training through Franklin Covey to our leadership team as well, too, which is going to continue to build on implicit and unconscious bias training. 2021 will mark the rollout of our anti-racism training as well, too, and we will be rolling that out in the fall of this year. So with that, I open it up to questions, fair or unfair.
Sounds like a throwdown, Jason, to me. Are there any questions? It's a great report. I think it's far more timely that it's coming quarterly, and I know that's a lot of extra work. So despite your caveats about it being a small data set, very much appreciated. Sandy, go ahead.
Thanks. You offered fair or unfair, so this might be unfair, I'm not sure, but you know, changing culture takes a long time, and we've been working at it for a while. Can you give us any sense of how we compare to other police services or other areas? Is that totally unfair?
Inspector Boucher, do you want the chief to take?
I can answer. Chief, would you like?
Well, actually, it's a great opportunity. Inspector Boucher is currently co-leading a national working group around intervention. And I like to refer to it as intervention versus use of force, because the reality is much of the work we do is intervention based in a very small percentage, and where we actually do and required to use of force. But Inspector Boucher has been doing a national scan in partnership with the RCMP, Assistant Commissioner Dennis Daly, for a national roundtable that Commissioner Lucky is chairing with a series of police leaders, and I have the privilege to sit at that table. So I think Jason can provide you that insight. But you know, the culture piece is extremely important. We recognize that it does take a generational piece. But Ontario, the province of Ontario, was very progressive. In fact, the first province to launch an intervention model in 1992. And although it's had a series of changes and modifications, the work that Jason is leading in partnership with other police leaders is around actually that evolution piece. But de-escalation has been a big part of the work that we do. Tactical communications has been a big part of the work that we do. And when you look at the actual end result, less than 0.1% of interventions or interactions we have with society have use of force. That being said, we must always continue to be committed to changing our culture, changing the way we do business. I'm a firm believer that policing are guardians of our society, that our goal is to nurture and to, ensure that communities thrive. And it is work, and we have to acknowledge that there's work to be done. But Jason, you may want to be able to provide that national insight in some of the work that is happening and how we do compare.
Yeah, I would classify this as a very fair question, Ms. Shantz. This is a topic that's being discussed internationally. I certainly am in contact with some colleagues in the US as well too, and it's a big topic for them. There is no national standard for use of force reporting. We all use different models. In fact, Alberta, as an example, uses two different use of force models for Edmonton and Calgary. So to be able to pull everything under a national framework so that we're all speaking the same language, I feel is very important, and I certainly very pleased by the position that I'm in to hopefully advance that dialogue. Much more operationally, though, your question does become very difficult from the perspective of how do we compare ourselves to other police services in Ontario that are governed by the same legislation. In part, that is very difficult for us because we have significantly expanded our use of force reporting through simply our own decision-making around our procedural change. So other services that haven't done that may find themselves in a position, at least quantitatively, looking better than we are. It's also very difficult too because each of let's say jurisdiction is presented with different circumstances in a particular time period as well too, and that makes comparators of different police services in the province very difficult. We did a data submission to the ministry just a few weeks ago, and your very question was top of mind. If data is to be presented without context, it can be very difficult to compare and to analyze.
Sandy, do you have any further questions?
No, I think just a comment. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. And yeah, data can be very misleading if you don't know how to interpret it. But I think the fact that we are including more and more data just speaks to how transparent we are trying to be with the community. So thank you.
Thank you for that.
Oh, sorry, Chair. I can add as well too that the report that we put forward to you in the first half of 2020 has become a somewhat standard provincially as well too. We felt at the time, and we continue to feel, that providing that level of detail is really the only way to understand the circumstances that bring us to a particular decision. And I know I have personally liaised with a number of police services that have adopted this standard as their reporting package as well.
That's good to know. Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Chair Redmond. Jason, thanks very much for that report. My question to I hope it's a fair question, but my question to you is when will we have the opportunity, the board members have the opportunity to take the use of force training? I know when I first came on the board many years ago that we did a session with board members, and I found it extremely useful in helping me to understand some of the situations and you know, the different things that happen possibly to an officer and how they react, and the use of force is brought into play or into effect. So I'm eager to retake that training again and to see it, and I'm hoping my board members will be open to that as well.
I don't know if that's a Chief Larkin question.
Well, thanks very much, Chair Edmund. Through you to Councillor Kiefer. We actually do have a session planned for everybody to participate in our intervention and our de-escalation and the work that we do. You know, we also very respectful of the current implications of the pandemic, as well as the reopening of Ontario Act. So we've had to pause that, but there will be an opportunity for not only all elected officials, but also members of our media to participate. We're just obviously working around guidelines and currently in the stay-at-home order. So stay tuned. We will keep the board up to date, and we will actually ensure that everybody's provided an opportunity for those that are willing, able, and interested.
I think that's great, Chief. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that. I see no questions or comments. So Chief, the next agenda item is monthly Chief of Police operational update. It's verbal, and I just want to remind everyone that you do have a hard stop at 12:50 as you are presenting national drug strategy at a parliamentary committee meeting. So if the media wants to get a hold of you, they can, I assume, contact Ms. Sherry Greeno after this. And I'll turn the floor over to you for fast.
Thanks so much, Chair Edmund, and my apologies. We've attempted to move this scheduled appointment, but I do feel very passionately, as you know, around national policy, around drug policy and the work that we're doing in our region, and the collaboration with the integrated drug strategy, public health in our community does really set the standard nationally. I'm so proud of what we're doing locally and how we collaborate. A very short really announcement and update, and I'm very excited over the last number of weeks, we've been involved in a series of promotional interviews, and the next phase of implementing the board's approval of the organizational chart was to invest significantly in our neighborhood policing and our investigative model as we look to the current trends within our community. We look to building community partnerships. The first phase was really our investigative piece, which Superintendent Fenton has actioned and is moving forward and progressing very well. The next phase was neighborhood policing and how we engage and interact with our communities, the way that our divisions are laid out. And, you know, as Mayor Shantz gets to perspective is that unique commitment with Sergeant Preble and Constable Cassidy in the rural setting, where there's strong connections in dealing with matters. I think we're always better. You know, I've been very candid that I do believe that in many ways we as a service and board need to pause and look to our historical context and get back to the basics, which is community-based policing, community engagement, authentic engagement, and focusing on matters that are important to our community and to our citizens and dealing with crime. And so to lead that up, we did restructure with the approval and support of the board, and I'm very excited to announce the promotion of John Goodman from superintendent to staff superintendent. Staff Superintendent John Goodman, as many of you know, is extremely engaged in our community, does significant outreach, is the board chair of the Community Justice Initiatives Board, CJI, and does so many other things in our community that are too far to list. And John will be tasked with leading a team that will implement and advance this on behalf of Deputy Chief Hilton. And I'm very excited to welcome to the role of Superintendent Jennifer Davis, who's being promoted effective May 2nd. She's currently the inspector in the South Division, but will assume the overall leadership role in our patrol divisions. I'm also excited to congratulate Inspector Shayna Morris, who's being promoted to Superintendent Shayna Morris. Shayna is overseeing and working out of the Chief's office on special projects, and Shayna is leading all of our innovation at projects around body-worn, in-car camera, digital evidence management system, and will also take on the next generation 911 project. And so it's very exciting to congratulate both Shayna and Jennifer on their promotions. Of course, that has a ripple impact, and I'm also very excited to congratulate Elizabeth Houston, who's currently a staff sergeant. Elizabeth will become an inspector. Elizabeth will take on our community safety and well-being branch and really work on a series of policy and strategy pieces so that our community understands what our policy is around how we interact around homelessness, around addiction, and advancing modernized progressive policy. Joining in that promotion is Inspector Terry Turner. Terry is currently leading our court services branch in an acting position, and we're really proud to make that permanent. She brings a great depth of investigative experience as well as partnerships, and so very excited to welcome both of them. And rounding out the round of promotions, very pleased to welcome Inspector Eddie Lewis. Eddie is currently working in our regional scheduling team, and Eddie will bring leadership to our North Division. So we'll have more, and we'll introduce everybody to the board at the May meeting, but I did want to make that announcement, and we will communicate with all of our regional municipal partners on some of the organizational changes we're making. So again, thank you very much, and I apologize for my hard exit.
Well, you know what, that is such welcome news, and no, not all of them, I guess probably 95% of the names that you mentioned are outstanding leaders, both for today and tomorrow. So great succession planning, and wonderful to see an acknowledgement of how much talent and skill these people bring to police services and to the community. So thank you for that, Chief. Great note to end on. Any questions or comments from the board? Is there any new business?
I'm not from the board.
Okay, we're in the middle of a board meeting right now. Are you a member of the public?
I am a reporter for CBC News KW.
Okay, thank you for identifying yourself. You've probably heard that the media avail that is usually right after the board meeting isn't going to happen with the chief because the chief has a hard stop. So if you wanted to contact Sherry Greeno, she can arrange for you to talk to the chief if you have a question.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ian, were you waving because you had a question or because you needed to disappear? Okay, I'm not seeing Ian anymore. Any new business? I see none. Any future agenda items? Any information items? I would now entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Carl, seconded by Karen. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Great meeting, and nice way to end it with all those great promotions. Everybody stay well.